Have you ever stopped to think about how ordinary people, without armies or wealth, managed to overthrow one of the most powerful kings in history and change the entire world? Imagine 18th century France, the richest country in Europe, with luxurious castles, extravagant parties, and a nobility living at the top of society, while the people worked themselves to exhaustion, suffering hunger and watching their children die from cold and misery. King Louis XV and his wife, Marie Antoinette, lived surrounded by gold and ostentation, but completely ignored the suffering of the population. But one day, everything changed. A revolt began in the streets of Paris and quickly spread across the country, growing like a wildfire out of control. What seemed like just an economic crisis became a true revolution. Palaces were invaded, the Bastille, symbol of oppression, was destroyed, and the people decided they no longer wanted kings in power. But the French Revolution was not just a fight against the monarchy. It changed the concept of liberty, equality, and fraternity forever. Today, you will understand how this popular uprising became a revolution that turned the world upside down, toppled kings, spread new political ideas, and left a trail of blood in the streets of Paris. Get ready, because this story is full of conspiracies, betrayals, and decisive moments that changed the course of human history. At the end of the 18th century, France was considered the cultural, political, and economic heart of Europe. But behind the glitter of castles and noble parties, the country was on the verge of collapse. The government accumulated unpayable debts, a result of costly wars and a monarchy spending without limits. Meanwhile, the people suffered. The economic crisis hit the poorest classes hard, and the price of bread, the basic food of the population, reached unsustainable levels. Hunger spread through cities and countryside, generating revolt and despair. At the same time, new ideas began circulating in cafes and Enlightenment salons. Philosophers like Rousseau, Voltaire, and Montesquieu defended liberty, equality, and the separation of powers. These ideas began to ignite the minds of common French people, who no longer accepted living under absolute monarchy. In 1789, King Louis XVI, pressured by the crisis, summoned the Estates General, an assembly bringing together representatives of the clergy, nobility, and common people. But what was meant to be a solution became an even bigger problem. The Third Estate, composed of the majority of the population, realized it had no real voice in decisions. That's when everything began to spiral out of control. The people started demanding change, and what began as a protest against abusive taxes quickly turned into a revolutionary movement. The streets of Paris filled with demonstrators, and tension rose every day. The world was about to witness the birth of a revolution that would not only topple a king, but forever change how societies think about power, justice, and freedom. In this video, you will understand the details of this historic transformation, discover how the fall of the Bastille became a global symbol, and learn about the events that made the French Revolution one of humanity's most important moments. To understand how the French Revolution began, we must first know the causes that led the people to rebel against the monarchy. At the end of the 18th century, France was immersed in an unprecedented economic crisis. The country had spent fortunes on wars, such as the 7 Years' War, and support for the independence of the United States, accumulating unpayable debt. Meanwhile, the monarchy kept spending without control. The palaces of Versailles, court parties, and noble luxury contrasted sharply with the misery of the people. The French tax system was unjust. The clergy and nobility, the richest classes, paid almost no taxes. Meanwhile, the Third Estate, made up of peasants, urban workers, and the bourgeoisie, carried the entire tax burden. This generated growing resentment because the people clearly saw they were sustaining a corrupt and unequal system. Besides the economy, there was hunger. The 1780s were marked by poor harvests and food shortages. Bread, the population's staple food, became so expensive many families could no longer afford enough to survive. Lines at bakeries grew, protests emerged, and dissatisfaction exploded in the streets. Amid this crisis, Enlightenment ideas arose. Philosophers like Rousseau preached that all power comes from the people, not kings or nobles. Voltaire criticized the church and defended freedom of expression. Montesquieu spoke about the need to divide power to avoid abuses. These ideas circulated among the educated classes, especially the bourgeoisie, but also reached the common people, who started to see an alternative to the feudal system and absolute monarchy. In 1789, King Louis XVI, pressured by the financial crisis, summoned the Estates General, an assembly not convened for over 170 years. This meeting brought representatives of the three estates, clergy, nobility, and the Third Estate. But it quickly became clear the Third Estate had no real voice since each estate had only one vote, despite vastly different population sizes. The people revolted against this injustice and decided to act on their own. Representatives of the Third Estate declared themselves the National Assembly, affirming they would create a new constitution for the country. This unprecedented act of rebellion marked the beginning of the French Revolution. Tensions quickly escalated, and revolt spread from political halls to the streets of Paris, where the people prepared to confront the king himself. The definitive breaking point happened on July 14, 1789, with the storming of the Bastille, one of the most symbolic events of the French Revolution. The Bastille was an old fortified prison in central Paris but represented much more than a jail. To the people, the Bastille was the ultimate symbol of royal absolutism, oppression, and government terror against its own citizens. It was where the king sent political prisoners, critics of the monarchy, and anyone who dared question the system, often without trial or defense rights. When the people attacked the Bastille, it wasn't just to free prisoners. In fact, there were only 7 prisoners inside that day. The goal was symbolic and strategic: to capture weapons, gunpowder, and mainly to topple a pillar of the absolutist regime. The crowd, made of workers, artisans, and peasants armed with improvised tools, surrounded the fortress and demanded the guards hand over weapons and gunpowder. The Bastille's commander, Bernard de Launay, refused and tried to negotiate, but tensions were out of control. After hours of siege and gunfire, the gates were breached, and the people took control. Launay was captured and, in a popular fury, lynched in the streets. His head was cut off and paraded on a spear through Paris streets, a gesture showing the people no longer accepted monarchy oppression. The fall of the Bastille marked the start of the armed revolution and became a worldwide symbol of resistance to authoritarianism. To this day, July 14th is celebrated in France as the National Day of Liberty. After this event, fear spread among the nobles and the king himself. Louis XVI pretended to accept changes but secretly planned his escape and sought support from other European monarchies. He knew if the revolution continued, his throne and even his life would be at risk. Meanwhile, in the countryside, peasants also revolted. The so-called Great Fear took hold in rural areas. Poor families raided castles, burned debt records, and destroyed symbols of feudal power. The peasants wanted to end noble privileges and acted independently, spreading the revolution through the French interior. In this climate of chaos and transformation, in August 1789, the National Assembly approved one of history's most important documents, the Declaration of the Rights of Man and Citizen. Inspired by Enlightenment ideals, this declaration proclaimed that all men are born free and equal in rights, and sovereignty belongs to the people, not the king. It was a milestone that forever changed concepts of citizenship and freedom, influencing revolutions and constitutions worldwide. But the revolution was just beginning, and in the following years, France would plunge into extreme violence and internal conflicts that would bring the guillotine to the center of politics. With the revolution in full swing, France entered one of its most intense and bloody periods, the so-called Reign of Terror. The monarchy still existed formally, but power was already in the hands of revolutionaries facing internal and external threats. On one side, European monarchies like Austria and Prussia worried about revolutionary ideas spreading and declared war on France to stop the rebellion from spreading to their lands. On the other side, inside France, political factions fought for control of the revolution. The people were divided between more moderate groups like the Girondins and radicals like the Jacobins, led by Maximilien Robespierre. For the Jacobins, the revolution would only be complete with the total destruction of the monarchy and elimination of traitors. In 1792, the revolutionaries made an irreversible step. They officially abolished the monarchy and proclaimed the French Republic. King Louis XVI was tried and condemned for treason. In January 1793, he was executed by guillotine in a public ceremony in Paris's Place de la Révolution. Queen Marie Antoinette followed the same fate months later. These executions shocked the world and marked the definitive break with the old regime. But paranoia and violence only increased. Anyone suspected of conspiring against the revolution could be arrested and executed. It didn't matter if they were noble, priest, peasant, or even former revolutionary allies. A single denunciation triggered the guillotine. During the Reign of Terror, about 17,000 people were officially executed, but the real death toll was much higher considering internal conflicts and violent reprisals. Prisons were overcrowded, and executions became daily spectacles. Robespierre, once seen as a defender of freedom and justice, ruled with an iron fist, eliminating opposition. His justification was simple and frightening. Virtue without terror is powerless. For him, terror was necessary to guarantee the revolution's survival. The French people, who had overthrown the Bastille for freedom, now lived in constant fear of being accused of treason. Paris's streets became execution sites, and the square where the king was beheaded turned into the center of this violent cycle. The guillotine earned the nickname the Widow and became the symbol of revolutionary justice. Even revolutionary leaders opposing Robespierre were guillotined. The revolution seemed a monster devouring its own children. This dark period lasted until 1794, when Robespierre lost allies' support and was arrested. Ironically, he too was condemned and guillotined, ending the terror. His fall marked the end of the Reign of Terror, but left France unstable and fearful. The country was exhausted, and people sought a new government to bring order without sacrificing revolutionary gains. In the coming years, this search would bring forth an unexpected figure, Napoleon Bonaparte, who would transform France's and the world's destiny. After the Terror's end and Robespierre's execution, France entered a new phase marked by uncertainty and attempts to reorganize. The provisional government, the Directory, took power in 1795. It was a 5-member system created to avoid concentration of power, like with kings and Robespierre. However, the Directory faced enormous difficulties. The economy was shattered, people still starved, and wars against European monarchies continued. Social inequalities persisted, and government corruption grew, increasing popular discontent. People's hopes for a just and prosperous republic faded, giving way to frustration and despair. Meanwhile, on battlefields, a young general named Napoleon Bonaparte gained prominence. With victories in Italy and Egypt, he became a national hero, admired by people and politicians alike. Seen as someone who could protect France from external threats and bring internal stability, Napoleon, in 1799, exploited the crisis and Directory's weakness to stage a coup, known as the 18 Brumaire, overthrowing the government and taking control. Initially, he presented himself as a defender of the revolution, promising to protect people's gains. But in practice, he centralized more and more power. In 1804, Napoleon crowned himself Emperor of France, ending the revolutionary cycle and starting a new empire. Many who fought against monarchy saw this as betrayal. Yet Napoleon promoted important reforms. He created the Napoleonic Code, influencing laws worldwide, reformed public administration, and established a national education system. He maintained some revolutionary principles like ending noble and church privileges, but imposed an authoritarian, centralized regime, placing power back in one person's hands. Napoleon's rise marks one of the French Revolution's most complex points. It began with abolishing absolutist monarchy and ended creating an empire. The revolution's full cycle showed how the quest for liberty, equality, and fraternity can transform into new, often contradictory power models. Napoleon would lead France to dominate much of Europe, but also cause new wars and conflicts shaping the continent's future. Despite all these outcomes, the French Revolution left a lasting legacy. It inspired other peoples to fight for freedom and civil rights and became a historic milestone against power abuses. Its ideas still resonate in democracies worldwide, showing that despite excesses and contradictions, the revolutionary flame never fully goes out. The climax of the French Revolution happens when the movement's essence is questioned. Imagine the scene. After years of struggle, executions, and radical changes, the French people who overthrew a king for freedom now see a new emperor crowned in Paris's heart. On December 2, 1804, inside Notre Dame Cathedral, Napoleon Bonaparte places the crown on his own head, breaking centuries of tradition. He refuses to be crowned by the Pope as kings did, showing the world absolute power now belongs to him. The same country that recently guillotined its monarch for abuse now applauds a new sovereign rising from the revolution's ashes. This scene symbolizes history's greatest irony. The French Revolution, started to end monarchy and guarantee liberty and equality, ends with an authoritarian emperor's rise. The people, exhausted by years of terror, hunger, and war, accept Napoleon as a savior who restores order and national pride. But in doing so, they relinquish revolutionary ideals that cost so many lives. This moment symbolizes not just the revolution's end, but the complex power cycles in human history. After all, do revolutions really change the world, or just swap who sits on the throne? This question echoes today in history books and debates on liberty and power. The French Revolution was not just a political change. It was a social and cultural earthquake, shaking Western civilization's foundations. It began with the cry for liberty, equality, and fraternity, and ended with a new emperor's rise, showing revolutions can be unpredictable and often contradictory. The French people overthrew kings, challenged the church, faced internal and external enemies, and rewrote political rules. Yet they also lived through terror, persecution, and suffering. The guillotine, symbol of revolutionary justice, became a synonym of fear, silencing not only revolution enemies, but also those who once defended it. Still, ideals born then crossed borders and inspired movements worldwide. The French Revolution planted seeds of modern democracies, civil rights struggles, and the idea that people can, and must, question their rulers. But it also warned that revolutions don't follow perfect scripts and paths to change are often tortuous and full of pitfalls. Today, over 2 centuries later, the words liberty, equality, fraternity remain powerful symbols, reminding us all of the importance of fighting for a just world without forgetting past lessons. After all, the French Revolution's history is, above all, a mirror of humanity's ongoing challenges balancing power, justice, and freedom.